I felt guilty on city council because the biggest complaint was about the sewer rate. And I'd be voting on it all the time, and I had no conflict.
You were the mayor.
Yeah.
You ever seen High Plains Drifter?
Yes,
Yeah.
Clint
You're
Eastwood.
the mayor and the sheriff. Remember the message? I'm the mayor and the sheriff.
Hi, Charlotte. Up, froze up again.
Yeah, you're froze. I'm froze.
Charlotte is on. I don't see her.
She
Lois is there.
is in the lower middle.
Hi, good morning.
How are you?
We're freezing up a lot.
Yeah, so, are you guys connected to?
Connected to the State House.
Right.
I'll look it up, sure.
Can you-
Do I pull it up?
Legislator is where we're hooked up.
Okay, so we have a slightly faster one.
Shoot,
One I've got it up right now.
shoot.
SH Legis, SH Secure,
You want SH Legis?
this one?
Yeah.
Try that? Connect.
And the password.
So is that what I'm on now? I'm only getting 2 bars here.
Yeah, I'm showing Wi-Fi SH-Legis.
And that's what you connect to? Yeah, okay. So that should be slightly faster for you.
SH Legis. This is the Attorney General.
Okay, you should be good there too. Do you have anything else open currently?
You mean like other internet things?
Other internet things or programs?
I don't use
Yeah, I
programs,
can-
but I got a couple websites open.
Should I close all that stuff?
Sure.
All right.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to take just a couple more minutes. We've got other folks joining us, but I just want to let you know we are live on YouTube right now. So you might want to mute yourself or keep conversations to a minimum. And I'll be right back. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome. I hear a
Hold on
background.
1 second. Anybody that's in this room, you want to turn off your speakers. So you want to turn your volume all the way down, otherwise we have an echo.
We'll be hearing it. Good morning again. Thank you. No back. Okay. I'm Senator Susan DeChambeau of the Maine Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. Today there is a briefing to that committee, and as invited guests also are members of the judiciary. Before we begin, we must establish a quorum. I will turn it over to Representative Richard Pickett, who will recite or give us the names and tell us if we have a quorum. After a quorum's been established, due to social distancing and the rules that govern this meeting, members will take a 10-minute break. Members have assigned rooms.
Oh my gosh.
And we have,
Oh my gosh. Okay, we gotta take a break.
we are taking a break.
Hello? Hello?
Hi, Craig. We're on a break. It looked like there was something flying in the room, maybe a bat. So they took a break to take care of that.
Thanks, Donna.
Yep. So just hang out. They'll be back when they deal with the issue.
Just a little update, folks. The bat has been captured. And now we're trying to regain a quorum here in the room. Of all the things we thought we might have to deal with today, a bat in the room was not one of them. So we will be right back with you.
Okay, let's try this again. I would presume everybody is on board. I don't see anybody except a picture of Representative Hickman. So we were rudely interrupted by a big bat. So it's now gone and we can proceed. As I mentioned, the first thing we'll be doing is establishing a quorum of the members of the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. I'll turn it over to Representative Pickett, who will read the names and see if we do have a quorum here today.
Okay.
I've got the agenda, but I just.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, we're having it posted. You want a hard copy because we're having it posted.
Yeah, I take notes off of the hard copy.
Okay, quorum call. Senator Susan DeChambeau.
Present.
Senator
Present.
Susan DeChambeau, present. Senator Kimberly Rosen. Senator, just in the room? Okay. Representative Charlotte Warren.
Present.
Representative Charlotte Warren, present. Representative Richard Pickett, present. Representative Victoria Morales.
Present.
Representative Victoria Morales, present. Representative Chris Johansson. Representative Chris Johansson, present. Representative Danny Costain.
Present.
Representative Danny Costain, present. Representative Janice Cooper.
Present.
Representative Janice Cooper, present. Representative Penny BB Center.
Present.
Representative Penny BB Center, present. Senator, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Representative Pickett. What we will now do is take a 10-minute break to allow the members who cannot remain here because of social distancing and part of the rules we were given. So we will take a 10-minute break to allow the members to go to their assigned rooms with their laptops and participate as also the members of the judiciary. So 10-minute break. and a video next to that. We will begin. Everybody is in their places. All right, good. So I'll begin by saying good morning, and my name is Susan DeChambeau. I serve as Senate Chair of the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee, and I represent the communities of Biddeford, Kennebunkport, Arundel, Dayton, Lyman, and Elford in the Maine Senate. For today's briefing with Public Safety Commissioner Sauschuck and Attorney General Frey, we have invited members of the Legislative Judiciary Committee to participate as some of these issues are of interest to both committees. The committee will begin with back-to-back briefings on the Maine Information and Analysis Center and training at the Maine Criminal Justice Academy with a focus on the use of force. Then we'll move on to a presentation from the Attorney General's office regarding the collection and compilation of data on profiling pursuant to LD 1475, which became law last year. We will then open the meeting up to questions from members of both committees. Members of the public can listen to today's meeting through the Maine Legislature website or watch it live on the Maine Legislature's YouTube channel. However, before we begin today's discussion and before I hand the mic over to my co-chair, Representative Warren, I want to acknowledge that the issues we will be discussing today are deeply important, even more so than usual, given what's happening across the state and across the country right now. In the Maine legislature, we represent individuals of all backgrounds, ethnicities, religions, and beliefs. Everyone deserves to be safe in their communities and heard by their government. My son Dom said something to me last week that I thought was relevant to our discussion today. He said, "I think we as a collective American conscience are just now fully understanding how normalized we made racism in too many ways. What seems like little innocuous things to some are rooted in deliberate racist viewpoints. I found what he said to resonate with me also. Our goal here today is to cover a lot of ground, get answers, provide clarity for Maine people. We have a full agenda, and I look forward to working with my co-chair to facilitate a thoughtful and informative conversation for all of us. I will now turn it over to Representative Warren.
Good morning. I'm Charlotte Warren, and I represent Hollowell, Manchester, and West Gardner in the House. And my job today is to share just a couple of the rules or pathways that will help us all handle this meeting a little bit better. One of the things I was going to say, and I will still say, is that we will have tech issues, and we will just all have to be patient with the fact that we probably will have to help people mute and unmute. And I didn't expect we'd have a bat, but we will have some tech issues, and we'll just be patient with each other. We are going to try to facilitate this meeting in a way that everybody gets the opportunity to ask questions. So the first thing we want to do is have one way for folks to let us know if you have a question. We are going to be using the raise hand function on Zoom. We have two folks that are here with us that are on with us that are the IT support folks. If you don't know how to raise your hand through Zoom, they can help you with that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we're going to do one question, then no follow-up at that point, one question, then allow everybody else the opportunity to ask one question. Once everyone else has had a chance to ask their first question, we'll go back for follow-ups. We'll do that next. We don't want some people to not have a chance and some people to have, take up too much time. The third and last thing that I think will be helpful to us is if you are in a room with someone else, and I know folks are spread across the State House complex and sharing rooms, if the partner in your room is going to go ask a question, please just turn the volumes of your speaker down so that it doesn't echo through the whole system. So I hope that makes sense. Just when you go to ask a question, your partner should turn the volume of their speakers down so it doesn't echo. Again, we'll have tech issues. We're all just going to be patient with them. I'm hearing from Representative Pickett here that some in other rooms are having very intermittent audio from this room. So I'm saying that out loud. Hopefully our tech folks can fix that. I think that somebody messaged in the chat. So Rick or Anthony, if you could help those folks out, we want to make sure everybody can hear without those issues. So thank you. Thank you all for being here. And I think that that's all I have to say. Thank you, Senator DeChambeau.
I thank you. Good rules that have been followed by other committees also. Well, we'll start with the subject at hand. First, I'd like to welcome, if they pop up, Attorney General Aaron Frey and Criminal Justice, or I should say, Public Safety Commissioner Mike Sauschuck. Gentlemen, are you with us?
Hello, this is Mike. I'm definitely on the line.
Okay, welcome.
Good morning, Senator. I'm here as well.
Okay. You have a copy of the agenda. I will begin with the first subject on the agenda, and that is a briefing. I will ask you first, I'm sorry, did either one of you wish to make a statement or a comment before we went on to the agenda?
Yeah, I guess I'll just start by just saying thanks for having me. It really is good to see everybody, even in a virtual platform. I know it's been a rough time. I know you're working incredibly hard from your homes to represent your constituencies and your community. So it is good to see everybody, and we hope to see you again in person shortly. So It's important that we're part of this conversation. We want to be leaders in this conversation, and we certainly want to be part of the solution. So we look forward to a good day. I know we've only got about 30 minutes planned for the hearing, so I'll just try to be as quick as I can.
Okay.
Okay.
I missed that memo. Okay. All right, we shall begin. Okay, the first item on the agenda is briefing of the Maine Information and Analysis Center, also known as MIAC. Commissioner Sauschuck and I believe Attorney General Frey will speak on that.
Yeah, and I will be taking the lead as the Commissioner of DPS on this one, Senator. And
Okay.
Certainly the Attorney General is a member of the advisory board, but we'll discuss all that as we go, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the end. So you want to stack all these briefings up, and then we'll just ask questions and answers at the end for all of the briefings. Is that correct?
No, we're going, there'll be questions after your presentation.
Okay.
We have 4 items on the agenda, and we'll go that way, okay?
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, that sounds
Yeah,
good.
thank you.
Much easier. Certainly, it's pretty dense material all the way around. So again, thank you very much for having us here today. I guess I'll just start before we even dive in to the MIAC, is that if I open this up for a tour or a conversation, just let me know when you want to stop out to look at the MIAC, and we can arrange for that to happen. It really is a set of cubicles in an office space. That's the extent of it. We don't need a lot of lead time. I just need to make sure that somebody's down there. And like right now, most of our folks are working from home, like all of us in many instances. So we can arrange that to occur. It's not some top secret thing that's happening down the hallway. It's literally some cubicles in a couple of offices. So if you'd like a more in-depth conversation or tour or personal conversation with the lieutenant that runs the unit, we're happy to make that happen. I also want to just touch on a couple other things. Work product that we sent in yesterday afternoon, and thanks to Jane and Jeanette for setting this all up and taking that information. We sent along a PowerPoint for the MIAC, and I don't have any intention of going through a traditional PowerPoint line by line, but because the material is so dense, we wanted something to work from. So I'm going to just take some highlights off those pages as we go. And again, happy to dig in wherever folks would like to after the fact. We also sent a couple of examples of work product. One is a kind of a bulletin style reference to human trafficking, and another is around a COVID-19 kind of daily activity update that we were also sharing around the state. A couple other documents for later briefings is a informational sheet that DPS worked with Maine chiefs and Maine sheriffs on, that I'll be working off when we get to training and use of force and things of that nature, as well as a press release that the Board of Trustees put out yesterday that details some of the policy changes that were implemented last Friday. So that's the work product that you should have access to. I'm not sure how Jeanette worked that out, whether that was an email to folks yesterday or there's a plan to share that information on the screen. We're all pretty good at Zoom, I'm sure, at this point. But that's just a little background on what we're going to do for this presentation. So thank you. So to get started, obviously the Maine Information Analysis Center, and that is that PowerPoint that looks like that as a screen. Really what the MIAC is, in fact, is an information gathering tool. It's not a criminal investigation unit. It's not operational. We don't have investigators that are out on the roads, doing surveillance and checking on leads. They're just really acting as a conduit or a bridge between law enforcement at the local, state, federal level. There's a tribal component that they would be sharing that information, private, public sector infrastructure folks. And that's what they do. They share information. It's not an investigative body in the sense that they don't do court process, which means they don't serve warrants. They don't do subpoenas. They don't actually investigate or do analysis on cell phones out of the MIAC. That's just not what they do. And there's a lot of different interpretations, and there's a lot of TV shows, and there's a lot of stuff out there about what a fusion center may look like. I can speak to what ours looks like, and there are 80 of these around the country. Every state has at least one. So everybody may be a little different, and we can touch on the limited stuff that I do know about other states, but that's really what they do. And that's what they were intended to do, gather, analyze, disseminate intel and information as appropriate. So when did this happen? Obviously, we all remember exactly where we were on September 11, 2001. And the commission that was put into place by President Bush after that, really the focus on that was information sharing. And one quote that's on that sheet, the system of need to know should be replaced by a system of need to share. So one of those findings with the commission is there's a lot of entities, a lot of agencies that knew stuff, but they weren't sharing it with each other. So the right hand didn't necessarily know what the left hand was doing. And that's not uncommon. I can tell you, I've done tactical debriefs and situational debriefs for years. And one of the primary issues that comes up virtually every time, if there's any problem at all, it's around communication. Well, the radios couldn't talk, or I didn't know what was going on over there, or you didn't keep me in the loop on what was going on. This is obviously at a broader level, but when agencies aren't sharing information, then we all lose. And that's where it came from, right? So these fusion centers started popping up at 2004 or 5, and ours was actually implemented in 2006 with an executive order by then Governor Baldacci. So again, a little bit about fusion centers in general, state-owned and operated entities, but yet they do fall under the umbrella of the Department of Homeland Security as a national network of fusion centers. And if you qualify as a fusion center, there's a lot of criteria and oversight work, and we'll get to that down the road, that DHS actually conducts in many cases on an annual basis with walkthroughs and audits and things of that nature. So, individually, they're looking at a vital resource, integrating information overall, and then sharing that information when appropriate. Again, 80 of these places around the state. Some states have as many as 6 of these. You can imagine, California, Texas, different components, different specialties. So I can picture the Northern California fusion center being completely different than the Southern version. For us, probably a prime example would be Massachusetts, where Boston has a fusion center in the greater Boston area, something called the BRIC. And then the Mass State Police have another version that kind of covers the rest of the state. So that's just one example. We have one. It's right here down the hallway at 45 Commerce Drive. No secret there about where we're at or kind of what we're up to. So we're receiving threat information from the federal government and others, and we're trying to package that information and, again, when appropriate, put that out to the right folks so that they can utilize that information for criminal investigations or situational awareness, which happens a lot as well. So you do have a map in there that it doesn't really matter, right? But there are 80 of these spread all over the place. The creation of Maine's version, December of 06, with Governor Baldacci's executive order. The focus, prioritize and analyze information, coordinate interagency participation, share intelligence or information, again, as appropriate. And then there's actually a link in there for that executive order, but that part's pretty basic, right? So information in many instances is just raw. You're getting material in. Information morphs over to intelligence when you actually start looking at it and trying to put the pieces together down the road. So that's, again, what they do day in and day out. That executive order is there, again, for people to see via that link, if you got it electronically, I suppose. The mission statement, again, talks about collecting, processing, and analyzing, and then in turn sharing that information with the proper folks. Oversight and regulation, I think that's a pretty dense slide, and there's some acronyms and stuff in there that may or may not matter to you. I wouldn't profess to be an expert in exactly what title this is versus that, but there's a lot of information there referenced to the various levels of oversight. So you have federal oversight through the Department of Homeland Security and their regular audits. You have state level audits and oversight. And then you have a regular department level with the Maine State Police oversight through their regular chains of command, the privacy policy, the advisory board. So there's a bunch of different levels there. It's actually a very heavily regulated entity. Not a lot of that regulation is known to the general public. So again, we appreciate the opportunity to discuss that here today. So next slide talks about privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties. Another piece of that audit trail since 2011. The MIAC has had annual assessments by the Department of Homeland Security, which means them physically coming into the space and doing an audit. So where's your stuff locked up? You know, how do you store this information and things of that nature? So that happens on an annual basis. Ongoing for the privacy side, that privacy policy is about 50 pages or so when you include the appendix issues. And that's kind of the heart of how the unit runs itself. And the advisory board, which has definitely morphed over years. The executive order itself is a little loose it's very loose rather, to be more specific around the advisory board and what the mission of that advisory board would be. The leadership team here started renovating, working on that privacy policy back in 2016. It was implemented in 2018. Since this administration came into place, we just continued that work. We do truly have a good team on the Maine State Police side that have really been working this thing. Maine State Police attorney, a lieutenant in that unit. And we've, I think, continued to professionalize processes around when audits happen, what are the duties of the board itself. That went from 3 individuals to 12. And now on a schedule to meet on a regular basis and to do certain things based on the bylaws. The bylaws are posted on the website, and minutes for these meetings are going to be posted on the website. So all those things are now in place when, say, 10 years ago, they quite frankly weren't. So that stuff is happening now. So moving on, again, characteristics of the Fusion Center. And I don't want to, give you a bunch of details that are going to bore you, but there's a distinct difference in the business. But a criminal intelligence unit, with the state police once had before 2010, those are folks that were actively working investigations, trying to determine confidential informants and looking at surveillance. And they were primarily focused on outlaw motorcycle gangs here in Maine, which years ago were the primary gang structure that we were concerned about. That's now morphed into other things and gang activity at a different level, primarily loosely affiliated business transactions around drugs. But for back in the day, this criminal intelligence unit really was focused on outlaw motorcycle gangs. Then in 2010-ish, it evolves over to a true fusion center, this gathering of information. And that has continued. So again, we don't initiate criminal investigations. We don't do criminal investigations. We may pass along information to other entities to do those, but we don't have criminal investigators, down the hall that are doing this stuff. It's primarily analytical support. I'll say it 100 times. It's not an investigative body. It's been explained to me as like armchair investigators, right? In the sense that, hey, I can look at a database, if you want to call that investigating, or I can do this, or I can do that. But they're not leaving that office space. They're passing that information along to other people. And I think the judicial process stuff is important as well. Not serving warrants, not doing subpoenas, not doing cell phone work. That's just not what they do. So there's some information on that slide for you. There's some stuff here about the organizational chart, which I think is always good for people to visualize exactly what that means. Really, it's 10 civilian staff down there and 6 sworn law enforcement officers. And that varies a little bit. As an example, Maine Drug Enforcement may have had a couple, but then they pulled them out because with COVID-19 across the state, local entities were pulling their agents back from task forces to work the road. So maybe they didn't have the room to have analysts down working with the MIAC day in and day out. So, that kind of varies a little bit. Naturally, some positions are vacant for a while as they fill them and people flex and they move around and they get promoted, they move out of state. About 7 of those 10 civilian positions are intelligence analysts. So they're actually doing the work on a computer and using their different databases. There's a slide on there that shows a bunch of patches. Those are just the folks that are intimately involved, have received training, used the system, are part of the system, just to show what those partnerships are. And I should mention, right, though, you're part of a task force environment, then those entities, I've got my database. There's a couple of records management system primary ones in the state of Maine, even though there are 13 total records management systems around the state. But the big ones are like Spielman and IMC. So that's data collection for regular law enforcement. So state entities use Spielman, right? So this desk over here may have access to that database, while another police department may use IMC. So they may have different information on that side. When you work at a task force and atmosphere, everybody can use that database. Just use it in the sense of, hey, Mike, can you check Mike in your system and see what you got? And if it's for the right purposes, then that's absolutely okay to do. It happens all the time. So, because that's what that patch sheet is, if you will. Threat priority stuff. This when it was initially started, it absolutely had a strong focus on terrorism, obviously coming out of 9/11. That is definitely morphed in fusion centers around the country. And the thought process, I've heard some people look at it as all threats, all hazards. Our lieutenant, Mike Johnston, refers to it as our threats and our hazards, right? Main hazards and main threats. So we have certain focuses that we really lock in on. And again, you have some of those work products. So it's definitely across the board. Criminal investigations, information sharing, officer safety issues. There's certainly situational awareness is a big piece of what we do day in and day out. You're trying to coordinate what a lot of other agencies, they don't have the opportunity to do that. They don't have the staffing or the expertise to do that. So there's a list of those threat priorities there, and we can dive into anything you like. And I'll give you whatever I can. Information tracking, documentation, and sharing. Again, no operational component. What that means is a line there. The MIAC does not have an active, ongoing information collection process, which is another way of saying we're not operational. We're not on the road. We're not actively seeking out confidential informants or doing surveillance. We're just not. So I will say that some of these fusion centers around the country, you do have an information sharing arm, and then they may have a criminal intelligence unit attached. So somebody may be here gathering intel. Hey guys, go out and research this for me. Let's lay eyes on something. We don't have that. So that's just what we do. And I know it exists in other states because I asked the questions, but I don't know that much more about whatever the BRIC does or anybody else. There's a pretty cool slide in there, the information process that has a little funnel, and it kind of goes through a process of how information comes in, how it's vetted in the middle, and then how it comes back out at the bottom into the records management system. I won't go into that to a great deal, but I'm happy to if you have any questions there, and we can certainly dig into that. MIAC capabilities, again, your research and databases, case support, situational awareness bulletin, information sharing. This analysis stuff may get a little deep for you, maybe too much in the weeds, but it's around case support, criminal investigations versus different kinds of analysis work. Production, there's some work product there, bulletins and pass-throughs and different things that we work on a regular basis. See something, say something. I know you've all heard that. That's a catchy phrase that has been around for a while. Actually, right after the marathon bombing of Boston, right? That's when we first started hearing about that. When the world changed around jet ports and things of that nature after 9/11, there was some talk about it. But we were a part of that officially national network around that campaign as about 2016. So there's certain criteria for suspicious activity reporting that goes to the federal government. I'll tell you, we've done 45 of those official reports to the federal government since we started this thing in 15. So 5 years, 45 actual reports. Cop math tells me that's about 9 a year, right? So people can put in information that's vetted, and then if it meets the criteria for what, in fact, the federal government would like to see in their system, then it's sent along. It's not just some just broad-based. If it's suspicious, we're sending it. You got to vet that information. You got to look at it. And you got to make sure that it's some valid information that may be helpful and again meets that kind of criteria. So see something, say something, the suspicious activity report process, and that falls into two buckets. One is kind of criminal complaints that may have something to do with, as an example, government buildings, airports, cybersecurity, all that kind of stuff, and then suspicious activity. So within those 45 reports, you're going to have a breakdown a couple different ways. One of the reports that I saw was around ransomware, as an example. A community got hit with ransomware, and there's an email out there with a threat around this, then that would go into this federal database, because there may be, and certainly is in most cases, a federal nexus into what that looks like. Evidentiary standard for suspicious activity reports, that can be a little dense too, right? There's a kind of the burden of proof when you start talking about tips and leads and what kind of percentage is that, all the way up through beyond a reasonable doubt. I won't spend a lot of time on there, but when you see 28 CFR Part 23, your eyes may glaze over, but that's really criminal intelligence policies. That's a federal statute that people are supposed to work through and utilize when they're looking at information and sharing information. So I could literally talk about this stuff all day, or certainly put people on here that could talk about it all day. But I didn't really want to go through that PowerPoint like a traditional PowerPoint. Slide A says this, this, and this. So that's all I have for a presentation. But I'm happy to answer questions and do whatever I can to assist. So thank you very much for the opportunity to brief out on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Sauschuck. What I'll do now, and as Representative Warren told you, if you wish to ask a question, please so indicate. When I recognize you for the first time, especially we didn't introduce the Judiciary Committee members, I'd like you to introduce yourself the first time. Just do it once. It'll last all day. And also say which committee you're on, and you may also speak about your House district who you're representing. So I am looking at both Representative Warren and Pickett, and they will tell me that the first question is from Representative Donna Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Donna Bailey, and I represent House District 14, which is part of the incredible city of Saco, and I am the House Chair of the Judiciary Committee. Thank you for being here this morning, Commissioner. I just had one question about the formation of MIAC, and you said it was by executive order, and I'm just wondering if that is typical of these fusion centers across the country. Are they formed by and continue to be in existence by executive order, or are there some that have legislation and therefore legislative oversight? Thank you.
Yeah, great question, Representative. And I won't take a lot of time, but I was in the city of Saco yesterday at the police department for a really cool unveiling down there. Chief Clement's great work that they're doing, won a national contest for a video, and the chief of the city of Saco actually wants to use the $5,000 that they won to put on implicit bias training for a broader segment of the community. And DPS, the governor's office, is supplying some additional funds so we can work together on that project. Really cool stuff. If you haven't seen it, I know you've probably seen it, Representative, but the others on the call here, the city of Saco has a YouTube channel, and take a look at that and just see how they're kind of paying it forward is kind of the theme there. So sorry to go off on a tangent, but I can't let that go. That was a good time down there yesterday morning for sure. So to my knowledge, Representative, they have been formed by executive orders across the board. I don't know if other states have morphed into a different model, but this has that two levels. From a state perspective, they're owned and operated by the state. They are formed by executive orders, but they fall under that Department of Homeland Security overall umbrella through the network of fusion centers. So thank you for the question.
The next person I have is Representative Evangelos. Representative Evangelos, are you there?
I'm here. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Thank you. I'm Representative Angelos, residing in Friendship House District 91. I'm an independent. Commissioner, I heard your words, but all we're getting is personal assurances. We don't have any independent oversight of the fusion centers. And we don't have a lot of independent oversight around any of our law enforcement activities in the state, which are desperately needed. But my question, because of the Loader lawsuit, we're unable to ask a lot of key critical questions regarding the activities that go on in there. But one of my main concerns is you are doing surveillance and assisting the other police agencies at the Fusion Center. Are you going through the requirements of the Fourth Amendment to obtain a particularized warrant from a judge? Or are you doing the surveillance without obtaining a warrant?
Well, Representative, I appreciate the question. You say we're doing surveillance. I'm not sure exactly what that means. We're not doing physical surveillance on anybody, and anything we do as far as information gathering is from open sources only. So information that's publicly available. Anybody else could jump on a Facebook page and see what somebody's up to. That individual has control of their information. And as I mentioned, the MIAC does not do warrants. We don't deal with situations that require warrants. So nothing that would fall under the Fourth Amendment. If it requires a warrant or a subpoena or further investigation or criminal investigation, that information would be passed off to somebody else. That's not something that falls under the MIAC.
And we're not allowed to ask a follow-up. Is that correct, Madam Chair?
No, only after everybody else has had an opportunity to ask one question, Representative Evangelos. Once that's done, you may follow up, all right?
Okay, so I should hit my mute button now, right?
Mute? Yes. Thank you. The next person we have is Representative Talbot Ross.
Thank you kindly. I wanted to just go back to your report, and thank you for being here, Commissioner. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Rachel Talbot Ross. I represent House District 40, which is part of Portland, and I'm pleased to be here today. I want to, before I ask my question, just honor the lives of David Ocott, who lost his life at 26 years old, and also Chance David Baker, who lost his life at 22 years old at the hands of law enforcement in the state of Maine. You talked about see something, say something as policy. And in the past, this has historically applied for folks in my community in ways in which has always disproportionately ended our lives. See something, say something when we're jogging down the street. See something, say something when we're grocery shopping, when we're sleeping in our beds, when we're at home doing barbecues. What is it within this policy, Commissioner, that ensures that there is, that you are mitigating racial profiling in it, that you are taking the steps to ensure that the public is just not spying on Black people? See something, say something has gotten us lynched in this country. And I would like for you to respond to how you're making sure that this is not happening in the state of Maine. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for the question, Representative. So just so I'm clear, see something, say something in this respect is something that somebody would send information in to the MIAC as an example. From that information, we don't have law enforcement officers that are actively responding to something to investigate real time. That's not the policy that I'm referring to. We're talking about see something, say something as a policy from the MIAC. And that means that they're taking information in, they are vetting that information. That's not just simply somebody, so-and-so did this. They look at it and go, does that meet the criteria under the federal government's guidelines? Which means there's some kind of a nexus there to pre-operational staging or pre-operational training for a potential terrorist act, as an example, or a criminal act, then we would use that information, vet it, and enter it into the system to the federal government. This is not a call for service related thing in local communities.
Thank you.
There. Representative Warren, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here and presenting and answering questions. My question is sort of a follow-up to Representative Talbot Ross's question. You know, definitely I was surprised when I saw the See Something, Say Something that is, you know, has been connected to collection of some pretty biased data. I just want to say, you know, for me, it's when I first learned about MIAC, it was very interesting that we're collecting information, we're collecting data on our own citizens. It's fascinating to me. You know, when I think about the government collecting data, I think about the government collecting data on our enemies, our opponents, our people that we, so I just, as a statement, it's fascinating to me. And what worries me is that I think we know, I hope we all, you know, have a shared truth that there's bias cooked into our system. And since there's bias cooked into our system, since there's racial bias cooked into our system, then the police data, the data that's being collected and crunched, and the crime stats that are being reflected and shared back and forth from all of these folks that you talked about, right? The federal government, state government, local municipalities, inland fisheries and wildlife, I'm sure MD, the main drug enforcement agents, national, you know, all of this is being shared back and forth. And if the data is collected and sort of submitted in a method that we know is based on racial bias, don't we need to be questioning the objectivity of this data? Especially, I think you referred to them as armchair investigators. So we have armchair investigators crunching data that we know is originating from biased sources. It just seems like high-tech racial profiling is what I worry about. My question is, what measures do you agree? Because that's the first thing, that's the most important part. Do we all agree we have an issue, and do we all agree that we're working together to fix some issues? Do you agree that's an issue? Do you agree that what I've stated here is an issue we should be concerned about? And if you agree with that, what measures are you taking to make sure that we are not participating in a process that is gathering and crunching and redistributing racially biased data? Thank you.
Sure. So I do believe that implicit bias is in all systems in all walks of life. I think that's a given. I completely agree with that without question. You know, actually, Representative, you just made an argument that was made when we were looking at the collection of racial data by law enforcement under 1475 in the last session. You know, we made those exact points. And I'm happy to continue that conversation here today, but that's absolutely was a piece of what law enforcement associations came forward to discuss. We want to make sure if we're collecting data in that particular scenario, law enforcement officers were asked as part of the bill to use their perception, an officer's perception, to fill in the blank around race, sex, gender, religion, and socioeconomic status, based solely on the officer's perception. If they couldn't get the information directly from a driver, then they're going to use their perception to do that. That sounds inherently flawed to me for exactly the reasons that you just mentioned. I do think it's important that we do, in fact, collect that data, and we're happy to have that conversation. There has to be a way to do that. But I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's something that we have discussed in various settings over the years. So back to the heart of your question, the first one was yes. And the second one is that there is a vetting process. The reason that we've only sent 45 of these to the federal government as actual suspicious activity reports is because there has to be a fleshed out picture here. This can't be one of those scenarios where somebody was, to be quite frank, right, driving while black or in the neighborhood and shouldn't be in the neighborhood. That's not this kind of suspicious activity reports that are passed along to the federal government. And information comes in, you have an analyst that looks at that vets that information, that in turn goes to a supervisor to look at, and then that information is ultimately entered into that federal system. So I do believe there is a process in place where it's not just allowing people to loosely send in inflammatory style activity reports that would be blindly forwarded on to somebody else. So thank you for that.
The next person who will ask a question is Senator Bellows. Senator Bellows, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Senator Shenna Bellows. I represent Senate District 14, which are the towns of Pittston, Randolph, Chelsea, Gardner, West Gardner, Farmingdale, Hollowell, Manchester, Reedfield, Winthrop, and Monmouth. And earlier this year, a Portland Press Herald investigation revealed that Maine is one of only 2 states that has a specific law to allow state officials and the Fusion Center to neither confirm nor deny the use of controversial new technologies for surveillance purposes, like facial recognition technology or using simulators to engage in cell phone tracking. How, as legislators who are conducting oversight, are we able to know what technologies MIAC is or is not promoting or facilitating with regards to intelligence gathering on Maine citizens?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know we had a lengthy conversation around facial recognition for sure. There was the one bill regarding photos for the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. This kind of was the vehicle where that came through. I think from a law enforcement perspective, let me just give you an example of information we would release in certain scenarios and would be reticent to do in others. So if somebody was to ask me, Mike, does the MIAC utilize cell phone analysis style technology, right? So a 30,000-foot view question around a certain category of technology. The answer would be, yeah, law enforcement absolutely does use that. Does the computer crimes unit utilize cutting edge technology to investigate sex assaults on children in our communities? Absolutely. Mike, do you use Spiderfish do you use that piece of technology? And that's when we would have a problem, because we'd be like, so I can answer this, but if I answer that, that does give, in fact, the criminal networks, the folks that are actually committing crimes against our residents, against our kids, against our communities, the technology to, in fact, not use it or do a different way that makes it more difficult to catch them. So I would just say simply that we don't use cell phone simulators. I'll just tell you that straight out. We don't have facial recognition technology through the MIAC. We don't have that capability. We do, however, have MOUs and agreements with other states that have access to facial recognition technology. And we've used that technology as an example every time for a criminal investigation for a purpose. And as an example, we've had homicide victims, which we can't identify. We don't really have any idea who they are, where they came from. But somebody says, I think so-and-so's from New York. So we may send a photo of a victim out of state. And the partners that we have out of state, just so I'm abundantly clear here, are using public information photos. When people hear facial recognition overall, I think they could think about made for TV style stuff. They could think about a European model, which you may walk through a park and there may be cameras actively doing facial recognition on people that walk through the park. There's no criminal nexus. There's no specific reason to do analysis or do comparisons, but they're actively picking up faces as they walk around and comparing them to databases that they have. That's not what we do here. They would be comparing a photo as an example of this victim of a homicide specifically that I'm thinking about, and comparing them to booking photos in another state or Bureau Motor Vehicle photos in another state. So public information, not private information. So that's kind of how we would use facial recognition here in the state of Maine, but we do not have our own system. I hope that it's a big topic. There's a lot in there, but I hope that helps a little bit. Happy to dig back in on a follow-up if you like, Senator.
I think we're holding our follow-ups until everyone is able, but thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bellows. It's come to our attention that there are some of you that would like to raise your hand, but on this technology, you're not sure how to do it. So I am going to turn to someone who's better at this than I am, and Representative Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that the issue is some folks have a different program than I do. So I'm wondering if Rick or Anthony would be able to go on mic and help. We've got a few folks who are struggling to get their hand raised up. Could you give us a little tutorial about what might be happening? There are folks that can't see the option.
Yes, can you hear me? This is Rick.
Thank you, Rick. Go ahead.
Yes, if you click the participants button at the bottom of the screen, you should see, oh, sorry, hang on one second. If you click the participants button at the bottom of the participants list, you should see an invite button, a mute me button, and then 3 dots. And the 3 dots should give you the raise hand option.
You had it before.
Well, I know, it was a different view.
Oh, here. You just got it. How did you get it?
And you may need to close a chat if you have the chat window open in order to see that.
I think I've successfully raised my hand.
We have 2 people who raised their hand. Hold on one moment, please.
Morales.
Yeah. All right. Representative Morales is next, followed by Representative Reckitt. Okay, so I'm gonna recognize Representative Morales.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We're just figuring out some technological issues here. Thank you, Commissioner. I wanted to ask some questions about budgets and MOUs. And I assume that I have not seen any of the MOUs or the grant language. And what I'd want to know is sort of what we are bound to by nature of receiving federal money for this particular information gathering center. And I'd like to know specifically about the budget. And you said there are 16 employees. Which ones are funded specifically by the federal dollars? Which ones are funded by our state dollars? And just the overall entirety of the budget, what that looks like. So I guess it's a 3-part. I'd love to see the MOUs, all of them that we have, as well as the grant document and the specifics of the budget.
Thank you. And I meant to mention this earlier, Representative, but for everybody's knowledge, Victoria had sent a couple data requests, one on calls for service. We're still trying to work that. I did get something back, but I need to really dig into it a little bit so I can understand it and actually explain it. It's a little different than what I'm used to seeing in my previous life. And I didn't want to just send it out without actually knowing what I was talking about. Another one was some traffic stop data that we have reached out to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles for, and that's just simply, we don't control that system. So we've asked for some feedback, some data from the folks that in fact do that. And when we get that back, then we'll certainly send that along. So, so that's a little bit on that side. So budget-wise, as I mentioned, the MIAC has 10 civilian employees and 6 law enforcement officers. 3 of those law enforcement officers happen to be Maine State Troopers. The budget itself for the MIAC, we have $829,051. It does go through the general fund highway fund split, which is a 65%, 35% split. That's not a split that the agency or the department has selected. That's something that works through transportation. That's been worked a number of times in the past and has changed the percentages simply because we do have a rural footprint for patrol, and we also have heavy coverage on our highway. So in that regard, that's where that 65-35% split comes from. Federal funding, we actually receive $100,000 through the Homeland Security grant funds, and that goes primarily to fund a analyst position through MEMA. So that's where that money comes back through. So there's $100,000 on that side. MOUs are sought and agreed on between the MIAC and the entities that we work with. And I should also just mention that, if National Guard, as an example, has an analyst that's in the MIAC, the budget numbers that I gave you, they don't fund their salaries or their benefits. So if we have partner agencies that are plugged in, they take care of their own salaries and benefits on that side. So that you may look at that and go, 829 seems low. It may seem low just because we're not picking up the full boat for 16 people. A lot of those folks just fall naturally under on their own organizations.
Thank you. That's exactly what I assumed. And so if we could get that overall number, even though Maine may not be contributing all of the money towards the operation of this center, that would be excellent. And just to your point about the questions I asked around calls, I thank you.
Representative Morales, is that a follow-up? We'd like to, you can come back and make that statement.
I'll come back. I'll come back and clarify that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next person is Representative Reckett.
Hi. Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you. Yes.
I wanted to ask a question about the advisory board, which I understand was sort of informal until October of 2019. And my curiosity, I have two connected curiosities. One is why October 2019? And what is the expectation of the advisory board? What is its mandate? Who's on it? Who's going to be, what questions are they going to be asking of who and why? So it's just I have no sense of what an advisory board in this particular instance might do, but I would hope that it has at least some articulated reasons for being and ways of operating.
Yeah, sure. Great question. And it's obviously you've been part of a lot of boards over the years, right? So all of them are a little different. The duties, the mission of the advisory board is now laid out in those bylaws and with a little jump start on the privacy policy side. So those bylaws are on the website. But really, when we implemented the new privacy policy, the bylaws in 2019, it did call for essentially reconstituting the board, which if you go back to the original executive order is incredibly loose on what they were supposed to do, how often they're supposed to meet, what their mission is. So there really is an oversight component there. They've met a couple of times, once in December of 19 and one actually this month, early June, where they actually went over audit information. They discussed policies and procedures. They really dug into that next level of what the MIAC is and what the advisory board would like them to be. So we went from 3 individuals to 12. Those 12 folks are, they run the gamut. The AG's on there as an example. There is a member from critical infrastructure. There's some law enforcement folks. If we'd like to see a list of who those folks are, I think we've had some of those questions, I think, come through the media. And I can certainly try to pull that together for you and ship that along if folks are interested in that kind of detail. No problem at all.
I would indeed be interested. Thank you.
Sure.
Next is Representative Corey.
Thank you. I'm Patrick Corey, represent House District 25, which is sort of part of Wyndham. So I have some concerns sort of about, even collecting public data as surveillance. So when we talk about what people put on Facebook and everything else, for me, any time that any law enforcement agency devotes to intelligence gathering, irrespective of, whether that's coming from surveillance or, like Facebook or whatever, in my eyes, that's surveillance. How does MIAC differentiate between sort of the more garden variety surveillance or data mining, meaning Facebook and stuff like that, versus other surveillance activities?
Other surveillance activities. So for us, to speak directly to the Facebook side of the house, as an example, if information comes in reference to some kind of criminal activity or an issue that we need to have situational awareness on, they would, again, look at open source Facebook data, or information rather. So somebody posted and said, this is what I'm doing, this is where I'm going, this is how many people are going to be there. That's information that they put on Facebook for a reason, because they want it out in the general public for people to know. Anybody can look at that information. I can understand and appreciate your feelings on law enforcement and observing that. But the other side of that, I think with certain circumstances, we'd be irresponsible if we didn't at least get situational awareness on what a situation is, how many people are going to be in a certain location and what is their intent. And that's one of the things that we're looking at to gather information and share that information with other partners, primarily, law enforcement. And then when you say other forms of surveillance, I'm not sure exactly what we're referring to there, because we're not doing surveillance in my definition. We don't have officers, we don't have agents, we don't have folks that are outside the office, doing that kind of work. So I appreciate the question.
Next, I will recognize Representative Cooper. Representative
Hi.
Cooper?
You hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. And I wanted to follow up on the question that Chair Charlotte Warren offered earlier and dig a little deeper. And the scenario that occurs to me, which is a problem, is where a call or other communication is made to local law enforcement people that are based on implicit or explicit bias. And I'm thinking of by a citizen. And I'm thinking of the notorious Central Park birdwatcher, where his crime was birding while black. Now, I understand that incident doesn't get sent to the federal database for racial data, but it does get into the system in the sense that an officer is sent out, that individual may have been arrested at the time, I can't remember, but a process starts. Is there a process in place now that permits local law enforcement to evaluate the claim of criminal behavior before, before further action is taken?
So it's a good question. I don't think it's
I can't
it's
hear him.
MIAC related, really, but I can certainly speak from a response perspective. Somebody calls dispatch with a complaint. Generally speaking, when the information comes in, is not the same as what officers find when they get there. So somebody may say that a subject is committing a crime in a certain location. That's all we know, right? What somebody told us that causes a law enforcement response. An officer arrives at the scene and goes, there's nothing here. This is a non-issue. This is not criminal. There's absolutely no issue here whatsoever. And then the officers leave. I think a concern around vetting these calls at the dispatch level is just as I mentioned, if they're not the same coming out as they went going in, you know, what calls do you say, well, we're just not going to go to that because it doesn't sound legit, or we're not going to go to this. I'll give you an example. One of the number one calls we have across the system are 911 hang-up calls. And somebody literally does a pocket dial on 911, the call comes in. The options are, it's probably a pocket dial, we're not going to send anybody. Or if we don't send somebody, and in fact, there is an issue, there is an emergency, somebody is getting hurt, then we haven't done our due diligence to keep people safe. So we send officers in the area, we check that area, and then we leave when we don't find anything. But we do have to respond because we're just not sure what the circumstances are. So very similar to this, somebody would call. It's different, I think, than that suspicious activity report concept, because we receive something, you vet that information, the supervisor looks at it, and then ultimately you may add that information to the system. But by and large, if we've only get 9 of those a year, that's not happening a lot.
Thank you. Next up is Representative Hickman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Craig Hickman. I represent District 81, Winthrop, Reedfield, and a part of North Monmouth at the foot of Mount Pisgah. Commissioner Sauschuck, thank you for being here and providing this briefing and answering our questions. I want to just read 2 sentences from the article that brought this lawsuit and whistleblower complaint to our attention, and it regards the Board of Oversight. It says the gubernatorial order that created the Fusion Center calls for a board to oversee its conduct, but the language does not stipulate how many people sit on the board or what their background or expertise should be. In 2015, the Oversight Board consisted of 3 members, but today it has 12 people, including 2 of the defendants in the lawsuit. Only 3 of the board members do not work in law enforcement or government, and then they are named a private attorney, Michael Feldman, a member of the public, and Lewis, the head of security for Central Maine Power. Given that there is no real guidance on who should be on this board, and given that it seems to be that almost all of them are law enforcement officers, Commissioner, do you think that an oversight board that consists of law enforcement officers mostly is the best way to monitor the potential abuse of other law enforcement officers? And if it's not, then who should actually be on this board?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm hoping to keep these answers to a minimum in the sense if they're directly related to the lawsuit, language out of the lawsuit. I've been advised by our Assistant Attorney General to be a little leery of digging in on those answers. I would say, however, that I think I can get to this one, sir, to say that, you know, we went from 3 because there was no guidance on what this board, this advisory board was really intended to do, to fleshing that entire thing out in the bylaws and expanding that out to 12. We definitely have individuals that are invested in the system and take part in these activities on a regular basis there. So we can bring some subject matter experts to the table, folks that know what they're looking for and how they utilize the information. But we're certainly, we can have a conversation about who should be on there. And we wanted to flesh it out with some privacy folks as well. and somebody that was involved in the infrastructure side. So I think we're open to that conversation for sure. If we continue this conversation, and we certainly will. And I don't have those bylaws directly in front of me to go through for you, but that information is out there in the general public.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This isn't a follow-up. It's just this, I don't know if my question was clear. So if you don't mind, I just want to repeat. Do you believe that law enforcement officers are the best people to oversee potential law enforcement abuses? That's actually the crux of my question.
I do think there's a piece of any panel that or any board that it is important that you do have some folks from that industry that's there. It shouldn't be 100% by any means, and there should be a cross section of people. If that's a clear answer, sir, so I apologize.
Thank you.
Commissioner, I have a question. This is Susan DeChambeau. The advisory council that has been mentioned, is that I'm going to presume that that's the Homeland Security Advisory Council. And what I have before me that I printed out, because it is really the function of Maine Energy Management Agency under subsection 708, Homeland Security Advisory Council, and it says membership is composed of 9 members. A lot of it, I don't see it updated. I guess 2011 may have been the last day it's updated. If I'm incorrect, I'd like you to point us to the direction where we would find a list of the 12 that you were referencing.
Yeah, so let me do this, Senator. I'm happy to send a link to those bylaws, maybe to both committees. I'm not really sure exactly what you're referring to. The Maine Emergency Management Agency, MEMA, was a partner in the forming initially of the MIAC, and that changed. Actually, MEMA used to be the lead agency on this, and that morphed after a couple of years, and there's reasons for that nationally on how that plugs in. But I'm happy to send out those bylaws. I'm not sure exactly what advisory group you've got there in front of you, so I apologize. And let me also just let everybody know that I've got a team of folks that are available on the certainty that I screw something up. So we're going to look at that and see if we can track that down real time. So hopefully, as we go through this, 10 minutes down the road, I can say, oh, that's what it is. We found it, because I don't profess to have all the answers by any means. So hopefully that's okay for now. I'm not really sure where that's coming from.
Okay, I'll just be specific for you. Title 37-B, subsection 708. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Senator, this is Aaron. I just sent a link through the chat that people might be able to access that should provide direction to the MIAC advisory board. If it doesn't go right to the advisory board, it at least goes to the MIAC page where the advisory board and its membership is outlined. So that would be in the group chat.
Thank you, Attorney General Frey. Representative DeVoe.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. I represent House District 149, which is Caribou, New Sweden, Westmoreland. My question to you is that we're noticing that there's going to become a similar program called the COVID Contact Tracing Team, where they're going to be using what they would consider open source information, I guess, by gathering names, phone numbers, addresses, and things like that of individuals who are going to be going to restaurants. And if open source information isn't available for law enforcement to possibly prevent attacks from happening on the homeland or other information that's gathered, Why would that be allowed and this isn't? To me, you're using intelligence in both avenues, but yet one seems to be acceptable and the other isn't. Thank you.
Well, thank you, sir. You know, as far as the COVID response and how that is really intended to allow for contact tracing so that we can, in fact, stay ahead of the virus and deal with outbreak issues immediately. And that's part of a broader plan by the CDC and DHHS. And that's one of the concepts behind that program. That certainly is open information and available to that team. I don't think law enforcement will be involved in that process at all, unless there's a local executive order violation style follow-up, which is certainly happening around the state. But I appreciate your standpoint, sir.
Sir, you didn't really answer my question because I gave you it as an example that we're using.
Representative DeVoe?
You allowed Representative Hickman to clarify his question. I'm doing the same.
Please get to the point. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, you're using the same type of information to gather to prevent a crime that you would be in contact tracing. Why would one be acceptable versus the other?
So I guess my hesitancy is we're not using contact tracing information. That's not we're not going to be involved in that process. Open source information. I guess I don't really understand what the question is. I believe that using open source information is acceptable from a crime, a terrorism perspective. I don't believe it's an apples to apples comparison when you talk about COVID-19 and contact tracing. So I apologize if I'm not interpreting your question appropriately. That's on me, not on you. But is that any closer to an answer?
No.
Okay, I apologize for that then.
Thank you. Currently, I just want to say that I have listed all the people that raised their hands. Is there anybody else that wishes to make one more comment? A new comment?
Senator, this is Mike. Just real quick, I did get some word back. So the Homeland Security Council is really a different scenario that falls under General Farnham at the National Guard and Pete Rogers under MEMA. And that's because General Farnham is in fact the Homeland Security Advisor for the state, which is routine that he at that level position and that title and his involvement with the National Guard that he would hold that position. So I do think that's a different council. And then the MIAC Advisory Board, the count I had last night was 12 people overall. I think on the main MIAC.org site, MEMIAC.org, it does list the participants that are part of that board. So sorry, but I wanted to answer that one before we got too much further along.
So that concludes the one question everybody wished to put out. We are now doing follow-up questions, and anybody can ask a follow-up question. First one is Representative Talbot Ross.
Thank you so very much, Madam Chair. Commissioner, I just wanted to go back to your answer, I think, earlier when I asked you about the see something, say something policy. Because I thought I heard you say that this is not an invitation for the public to weigh in, so that there isn't that opportunity for an invitation to profile folks. But I'm looking at the homepage and I'm confused about something that I hope that you can help clarify. Because it absolutely invites the public to, we ask you to contact your local law enforcement agency with tips on wanted individuals, unsolved crimes, suspicious activity, or any potential threats. Reporting and sharing for a safer homeland. to report suspicious activity, all you need to do is observe who or what you saw, when it occurred, why it's suspicious. So I'm having a hard time understanding what it is that you actually do. If on your homepage, you're encouraging the public to report suspicious activity, and there's not a definition of what that is. Yet you say that, and you said that you shared information between agencies, that you are a communication vehicle. So what is the information you're sharing and the connection to the public just giving law enforcement tips? Help us understand that, if you could.
Yeah, and I apologize for
tips to me.
I apologize for any confusion there. I mean, the way I try to explain that is discussing the MIAC today and what we do with see something, say something style suspicion activity reports versus somebody calling a local police department real time and saying that I just saw somebody jump off a bike at 3 a.m. in a backyard at some house. I'm not really sure what's going on, but that certainly appears to be suspicious to me. Somebody's hiding something underneath their jacket as they're going into a bank. And versus the see something, say something aspect of the MIAC and how they report that activity to the federal government through our channels. So to me, I just wanted to explain it as two different setups there. The regular call for service, which is in the community, is something that they're going to call dispatch. It's going to be similar to my response to Representative Cooper, is that as information is coming through, officers will respond to determine exactly what's going on or not in many instances, and then clear that call one way or the other, while a report to the MIAC does go through a vetting process and is approved by a supervisor before being entered into the national system.
I know I don't get another follow-up, but just for the record, you really believe that the public can understand the differences of what you just explained, since it's still unclear to me, to most folks? That's a very thin line, and it looks like you're asking people to spy on each other on the website. Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Well, I think, again, as I mentioned, that we do 9 of these a year to the federal government. This is not a willy-nilly process where we take everything that comes in and we just automatically throw that up the chain into the federal government. That's just not what happens. And I do believe that there are 2 separate scenarios here. And there certainly are a lot of aspects of what we do that can be confusing for people. But I do think there's a difference between a real-time law enforcement response at 2 a.m. and an information gathering unit that's in fact vetting information. So I apologize if I'm not adequately communicating that. Sorry.
And with all due respect, being Black in America, they're the exact same thing.
The next representative we have for follow-up is Representative Evangelos.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you again, Commissioner. Commissioner, I get it in terms of crime and terrorism, the necessity for looking into certain activities when they're strictly relegated to crime and terrorism. But today I've heard you make a presentation that post 9/11, this agency was created. Then it jumped over to Hell's Angels. We certainly have an agency suffering from serious mission creep. But my question specifically revolves around the Constitution, the First Amendment, the people's right to peaceably assemble to redress their grievances, and again, to be free from being snooped on or protected by the Fourth Amendment. And I just want to know, what possible interest does this agency have in people peaceably assembling in the anti-war movement, a movement that I happen to belong to? I've always suspected we were being spied on. But there are a lot of peaceful, lawful activities guaranteed to us by the Constitution. Why is your agency taking any interest in this at all?
Well, sir, I think first and foremost, we're not spying on people. Again, this is public information that's readily available. So I would disagree with that characterization for starters. I do think that when you see First Amendment activity and you see rallies or protests from a situational awareness standpoint, what I've always thought as a police chief and now as a commissioner is one of our primary goals from a law enforcement perspective is in fact to facilitate somebody's First Amendment right, to make sure that folks are safe. And that's why we've always reached out and continue to reach out. You can do whatever you want. I'm trying to get you from point A to point B as safe as humanly possible and make sure that we have side streets covered. I'll give you a lead and a tail car. We'll try to make sure that we're doing this for the best way possible. If you don't want to communicate with me on that, then that's fine. We're going to just try to do the best we can to help out. But it's always helpful to have information on the front end. So, from our end, situational awareness wise, if, Facebook math is that if 4,000 people say they're coming, it's probably closer to 2,000. But at least it helps us go, okay, well, maybe we need to cover these intersections. This is what we need to do to make sure we have enough staffing to make sure that people are safe. That's our primary goal in these scenarios. Obviously, over the last month, it hasn't gone that way in some of these circumstances. But from our perspective and the way I've always looked at this, that's exactly what our intent was from the very beginning. And we've had great relationships and we've seen incredible organization and a lot of powerful work that has happened by organizers around the state. A lot of stuff that people should be proud of, to be quite frank. But that's what we do with that information is try to gather situational awareness for what these situations may in fact entail.
You're not, the agency is not doing, developing profiles or gathering information about specific participants in these lawful movements?
No, we are not.
I just, given that some of the legal peaceably assembled demonstrations are specifically directed because of the transgressions of law enforcement, don't you recognize why I'm finding it hard to believe that that the people who are lawfully assembled should even have to ask permission to assemble or to get your okay or to brief you on anything that we're doing? What we're doing is lawful, and quite frankly, it's none of your business. We're not breaking any laws.
Well, I do think so that, again, from a safety perspective, being in the middle of the road and intersections and things like that are just something that we're trying to facilitate. That's what we're trying to do. I think there are communities that have permitting requirements and the State House as an example, state property has a permitting requirement. And really all that is focused on, we're just trying to figure out the best we can, how to help you be safe and how to have successful events. We have people contact us all the time, specifically at the State House, to say, this is kind of what I'm interested in. And we go, okay, well, we've seen a bunch of these and you may want to think about that. And this is a route. And if you do that, this is what we're going to do. But people don't have to do that. That's not a requirement. We're not mandating, nor would we. We're not in a position to do that. We don't want to do that. And we're not doing that. But I do appreciate, your point that if we're protesting against law enforcement, why would we work with law enforcement or tell law enforcement what we're going to do? I completely get it. I completely get it. But I think you can still have successful and powerful events while making sure that people are safe. And that's really what we're trying to do.
But my question wasn't directed to the
Representative Evangelos.
No, he didn't answer, ma'am. He didn't answer my question. My question was
Representative
directed to the
Evangelos, there are 5 people after you. I'd like to come back to you. All right, we shall do that. The next person on the line right now has asked to speak is Representative Costain.
Hi, Representative Costain. Turn that down. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
So my question is,
there's a little bit of an echo, sir. So
it appears to me on the website that it's asking people to call in if there's any suspicious activity or any information that they feel they should have. this is a volunteer basis. It's not violating somebody's rights to do that. This is all volunteer. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We're not, certainly not. We have no control whatsoever over who calls us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Costain. The next person is Senator Bellows.
Thank you. This is a follow-up on Representative Evangelist's questions from earlier. And just for the public listening, because there may not be awareness, I know many members of the public have expressed concerns to me about the explosive allegations made in May that the Fusion Center was being used to collect and share information about Seeds of Peace and opponents of the CMP corridor. But because of the litigation that's been brought, I know, Commissioner, you can't answer questions about that, even though that's very much the nature of most of the questions about the Fusion Center that have come to me. But that issue and what Representative Evangelist was asking raises a different question for me that has nothing to do with the litigation. And that is, what percentage of the Fusion Center time is being spent on collecting information on groups that have never been involved in criminal activity? And what protections are named and explicit to protect First Amendment protected activity, especially of activists and protesters?
Yeah, it's a great question. It probably goes without saying, but I don't have specific percentages on their work product and what that looks like. We can try to drill down and get back to you on that. But I don't know what the percentages would look like for their work day or their output. I just don't have that information. I think the privacy policy itself is 26 pages long. All of these oversight, that slide that I went through with various oversight components, there are strong civil rights protections that are built in there. That 28, 23 CFR, that speaks directly to privacy issues. So those things are certainly in place, and that's definitely a focus of audits that we've conducted and reports that we've done out to the advisory board. So I can check and see, what information is public on that side, what we could release, what we can. I don't know the answers to all of that, but that's what I can tell you for today.
The next person is Representative Morales.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. I wanted to thank you and then ask a question because I had sent a number of questions around really what do police officers do in the state of Maine, and so we can figure out sort of the percentage of time that they spend responding to things like non-criminal calls, traffic violations, property crime, medical needs, violent crime. And that sort of leads into my question today, because I've been getting a lot of folks contacting me about the 911 system, the call for service system. And I've been taking a good look at it in this past month to really understand how that serves as the gatekeeper for what kind of emergency response occurs whenever a call is made. And what I've learned is that we have national algorithms that Maine uses to trigger either a fire response or an EMS response. So there are specific, there's a data programming system that asks a series of questions, and then based on the answers to that question, a certain response is triggered. But we do not have an algorithm or any series of questions regarding police response. And so the police response is really the catch-all for everything other than fire and EMS. And so dispatch, for example, would have no other fourth option of maybe a crisis intervention team or something of that nature. And I've spoken to a number of people who would want something like that. So I'm wondering what is in the works, or could something like a fourth response, a fifth response be in the works that is more of a public health led crisis intervention response where public safety maybe is not the consideration, but it's an individual crisis that needs more of a mental health approach?
Yeah, it's a great question. One that has been discussed in Maine in the past. And obviously what you're referring to is emergency medical dispatch as an example, or fire dispatching, which means somebody calls dispatch. They actually go through what they used to do. It used to be physical cards, right? I'm going to ask this question that leads to this question that leads to that question. It starts over here and works its way up. Maybe that's a cardiac arrest. Then I'm going to assist the caller with some medical assistance to walk somebody through CPR as an example, or is that a potential overdose? And then you have your EMS personnel responding real time. And it's very similar on the fire side. When this was looked at on the law enforcement side, which is not as widely utilized around the country or the world as the first two, really the EMD, the emergency medical dispatch, has been in play for quite a long time, very well ingrained and structured. And then the next version was the fire side. And then we had the police protocols, I believe is what they referred to it as. I think that's got a ways to go as far as when I talk to Maine chiefs and Maine sheriffs and others, and they're looking at that tool and the amount of time and information and the dynamics, because it's completely unknown. It's difficult to ask the right questions to get the right response. So what we see now is that officers respond, and in communities where it's available, you may get that co-response, which is certainly something that I've discussed in front of criminal justice and public safety in the past, and something that's I'm very supportive of with our experience in Portland with a co-responder model for behavioral health issues, period, mental health and substance use disorders. So they would respond together. There's also a side that I've seen nationally where if this is a mental health call, we're only going to send CIT certified officers. Maybe that's appropriate in some communities. I found it better to have all the officers be CIT certified, because you just can't tell what you're going to find when you get there. So there's some of those things that I think we are addressing a different way. Cahoots is a program out of West Coast where they are doing some of that work now and have been doing it for a number of years. Information comes into dispatch. They make a determination. We're just going to send a liaison or a response worker specifically. I can tell you that in some circumstances that the unknowns outweigh the knowns. You're not really sure what these folks are going to be walking into, which can make it difficult to have folks respond from time to time.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are 4 people next, and there'll be Representative Hickman, followed by Representative DeVoe, followed by Representative Bailey, and then Representative Harnett. So Representative Hickman, you're up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, I just wanted to come back a little bit to data. I don't want to get into the profiling issue just yet, because that will come up later, but I am looking at a Maine Information and Analysis Center privacy audit dated 2019. And at the end of it, it has several forms that have been filled out according to the record identification number. I'm looking at 2641, a record evaluation form that uses that number, and that number corresponds to something that says Intel meetings, online meeting dialogue. So I'm going to assume that this record was created from some official spying on the communication that people were having online. All of these records have 21 questions, and they are yes, no, or not applicable are the answers. Question 17 and 18, 17A and 18 say, does the record include demographic descriptors pertaining to one or more of the individual's race, ethnicity, gender, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, or gender identity? If so, were those descriptors appropriate to include given the information being provided in the record? And is the information provided in the record based on individual behavior or objective facts and not on stereotypes, generalizations, or assumptions? Most of these answers are checked yes. Some of them are checked no in other records. Some of them are checked non-applicable. So if you have this kind of data collection happening for these purposes, and I'm sure they could be applied to profiling in general. How do you use this data? How do you analyze whether or not the information that's being collected shows any trend or pattern toward disproportionate spying on people who are falling into any of these categories that are absolutely listed on this form?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll ask some members that are here to look at those specific questions and look at that specific record, sir, because I don't have that in front of me. I'm not familiar with that, but it's very specific and it does allow us to dig in a little bit. So folks are working that right now. And as soon as I have an answer for that, I'll break in between questions and get it right back to you. So I will get right back to you. I think that one should be easy in the sense that we should be able to research that pretty quick. Sorry, I don't have that right now.
There's a slew of them. I just picked one.
Yep, gotcha.
They're at the end of the privacy audit. So it seems as if as part of the audit, people have to turn in these records and then you disseminate that information to the public online. But it asks very specific questions about demographic identifiers and they are being filled out yes or no. So I would like to know how the department is looking at this information and analyzing it because it does exist.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hickman. Representative DeVoe.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to follow up on the initial line of questioning that I had asked you earlier, specifically talking because I would have to think that most people on this call believe that what the MIAC is doing is it's supposed to be a public safety information gathering tool. And we have a number of attorneys that are on here who may differentiate that. They may use some special wording or things like that. But for the layman, that's generally what it is that we're talking about. And my question to you is as using it as the intended purpose of gathering information for public safety, you're asking questions like Representative Hickman just asked about demographics. If you go to the CDC website, it asks demographic questions for contact tracers. It asks, I know I've already confirmed your name. Are there any names that you go by for your medical information or information that may be under maiden name it, for instance? What is your gender? What is your race? What is your ethnicity? Are you Hispanic origin? Do you have a tribal affiliation? If so, what tribe? For women, it asks, are you currently pregnant? If yes, how far along are you? What is your, and any, in quotes, any other locally specific social demographic information? Now, my ultimate question here is, if we're using public safety information gathered by your team to prevent harm, and they're asking similar questions for COVID tracking, do you have an app that's been forced onto everyone's phones without their permission?
We don't have an app to collect that information, no, sir.
Thank you.
Representative Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, do you know, does MIAC use genetic genealogy to ID victims or suspects? And if you do, what do you have for safeguards to protect that DNA information? For example, are your records subject to Freedom of Access Act requests since you're not doing investigations? Thank you.
Sure. And so the MIAC is not an investigative body. It's not somebody that does, or a unit or an entity that does criminal investigations. So in order to get gene level or DNA level information, that would require warrants and subpoenas, which is not something that the MIAC does. So no, we don't collect that information through the MIAC. In a criminal investigation in a completely separate unit, I would suppose that would be an information that they may utilize or seek, depending on the investigation and the information at hand. And the MIAC is susceptible to FOA requests, and we receive them all the time.
Okay, just Madam Chair, if I could clarify, because I think you may have misunderstood my question. I wasn't asking about DNA samples. I was asking whether they use genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy is where someone, DNA is sent into a company, a genealogy company. Ancestry.com is the most popular perhaps, but there are others, 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, GEDmatch, etc. You may have heard on the news that sometimes this is used to trace suspects, and there have been a lot of cold cases that have been solved using genetic genealogy. So again, my question was whether MIAC uses that tool in order to ID either victims or suspects.
And I apologize, they do not, they're not an investigative body or criminal investigative body, so they don't do that kind of follow-up through the MIAC. I apologize.
Thank you, Representative Bailey. Representative Harnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here today. My name is Tom Harnett. I represent House District 83, which is the city of Gardner and the town of Farmingdale. And I have a follow-up question about an issue raised by Senator Bellows. She asked what I thought was a pretty straightforward question about how much time does MIAC spend collecting information on organizations that have never engaged in criminal activity or have even been suspected of engaging in criminal activity. And I would have thought the answer would be 0%. And I'm curious as to why that was not the answer provided.
Yeah, sure. Because as I mentioned earlier, we do conduct open source checks for situational awareness purposes. So there may be a rally or a protest circumstance that we're checking open source information for. I just don't know exactly what percentages that would be. So I'm never going to give you information that I know to be false. I'm hoping we can follow up on that and be more specific with an answer. But we do gather information and intelligence on criminal investigations. There's also a situational awareness piece that we're following up in order to coordinate resources around the state as necessary. So that's why I answered the way I did.
And this for clarification, I'm confused about situational awareness. You explained that with regard to protests, but are you saying you'll collect open source information and then provide it to other law enforcement agencies, even if the organization has never engaged in criminal activity or has been suspected of engaging in criminal activity?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I would expect agencies are doing that on their own, but if they do ask us for feedback or something that we know about a specific event, we would share that open source information, that publicly available information with other entities. That is correct.
Well, I look forward to receiving additional clarification on that. Thank you.
Sure.
Representative Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for answering our questions. My next question comes back to something that I asked earlier about racial bias, et cetera. And you responded that really you vet, the information is absolutely vetted because there's only been sent 45 cases to the feds is what you said. And then I've heard you answer to a lot of questions. No, we don't do that. No, we don't do that. We don't do that. That's not what we do. We do this other thing that police agencies also do. I'm just wondering, in the year 2020, a year that we are facing a lot of unknown expenses because of COVID, we are seeing that we have a lot of issues we need to start working on right now. And I think we're hearing all of our elected officials say we need to start working on these issues of racial disparity, both in our healthcare system. Maine has the biggest racial disparity in our health data around COVID-19, et cetera. You know what I'm getting to. how is spending $700,000 a year on MIAC, how is that a good expense? How is that? Tell me how this is keeping Mainers safe. Because what I've heard a lot of is, we don't do any of that. We do this, but agencies also do that. So that's a lot of money. And in my seat, I think that's a lot of money that can be better spent keeping people out of involvement in the criminal justice system. So could you give me how is MIAC keeping Mainers safe? How is it worth $700,000 a year?
Sure. So I think that, probably the obvious answer is that when you coordinate and you share information, it betters the system overall to allow us to use the limited resources that are available more effectively. So there are a lot of agencies around the state that don't have anything beyond a patrol component. So for them to be able to reach out and partner with others that can, in fact, spend time trying to gather information and better coordinate our responses, that assists agencies across the board, that assists partnerships across the board. So when we put out a bulletin, as an example, to law enforcement around the state that says, we have credible information that says a significant other is traveling here from out of state and is reportedly going to kill their ex, in this instance, I'm thinking within the last couple of weeks, kill their ex-wife in a certain location. This is what the car looks like. This is the license plate number. This is what the suspect looks like. He's arrestable on these offenses. I don't know how you put a dollar amount on sharing that style information, but it's certainly incredibly helpful, and it's completely driven by public safety. You talk about one of the bulletins that you have as an example of work product was around human trafficking, and talking about, well, this is the parameters around human trafficking, and these are the things that we've learned, and this is some statistics about that. And this is things that we're very mindful of, and keep an eye out for this. You talk about missing persons, whether they're children or silver alerts, and how do we coordinate that information across the entire state? Maine being what it is, which is large geographically, but very rurally sparse with people. How do agencies from Aroostook County to York County, how do they talk? How do they share information? That sharing of information really comes through the MIAC. And so what price tag you would put on that versus somebody else, that's certainly open for conversation. I certainly think that, that we need and should, it's an absolute necessity that we fund a lot of these other aspects of society, as you've mentioned. They need to be funded at a higher level. How that impacts the MIAC in budget conversations down the road, I suppose that, that remains to be seen.
Thank you. Next two, I have Representative Cooper, followed by Representative DeVoe. Representative Cooper? Are you with us, Representative Cooper?
Yeah, here I am.
Okay.
All right. This is changing the subject a little bit, but as you know, Commissioner, Maine, as well as every other state, local law enforcement and county and so forth have been the recipients of federal surplus military grade equipment through a program that tanks, it includes shields, it includes all manner of equipment that's been manufactured and created for military use, not for civilian law enforcement. Yet this equipment has been provided basically free of charge to local police, sheriffs, and so forth. And so I wondered if your office has an inventory of the materials of that sort that have been provided in Maine, and kept track of when those materials have been used against civilians?
I'd like to just interject. I'll let that question go and the commissioner may respond, but I'd like to remind and have the committee members look at their agenda. That to me would have been a question that would have been on number 4, which is a question and answer period. I don't want to deviate from what we're talking about, Maya, but I apologize. You were very much into your question and I didn't want to interrupt, but I will now turn it over to the commissioner to respond.
Yeah, happy to answer that. So that 1033 program, it's what that the official terminology is through the federal government. I can tell you that there is a statewide coordinator that's not a state employee that's required and currently uses 3 auditors, if you will, 3 employees that are generally part-time and employees not right because they don't get paid. They're volunteers that work around the state to conduct these audits and to track this equipment that is now being used by law enforcement. So I don't have an exact count on that. We're not involved with the management of the 1033 program. However, on the Maine State Police side, as an example, which is the largest law enforcement agency in the state, we're about 330 officers versus Portland's about 162. We currently have 2 M1 style rifles that we used for ceremony only for the honor guard, and 4 sets of night vision gear. All of that equipment is off the road. We're not utilizing that operationally. And one of the aspects of the 1033 program that is difficult to work with, it's tough to give stuff back, to be honest with you. We'd love to get rid of this so we don't have to follow through with annual audits. It's antiquated equipment. It's not something that we're actively using in any way. So we're storing it, we're tracking it, we're auditing it, and we're involved with the federal folks on an annual basis. So that's how we're involved. I don't have, however, a count on what other agencies around the state may or may not have.
Thank you.
Representative DeVoe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, again. And I just wanted to correct one comment. Humvees are not tanks. They're multi-wheeled vehicles, just like a truck. They're not a tank. My question to you, again, is revolving around the contact tracing and the MIAC system. The fusion center we utilized in the military quite a lot. We call them S2 locations in combat areas.
Girl, what would I know? I'm just a girl. What would I know?
It has nothing to do with you being a girl, Janice. It actually has with the lack of information you put out. So let me get back to my question. The Fusion Center could have been utilized to do more the criminal investigation and could have assisted the CDC in better tracking of the outbreak from the initial question, some of the initial questions that we had asked the CDC for. Was there ever a request from the CDC to assist in better tracking of the outbreak?
No, sir. Not that I'm aware of. I can tell you that the MIAC, well, you have one of those example products. We did put out a COVID-19 daily brief that was primarily sent out to law enforcement to kind of track these things. That was an initiative that we started to try to put as much information as we could in one spot and use a system that law enforcement was used to using. But to my knowledge, there was no request from the CDC to utilize the MIAC specifically for tracking purposes.
Thank you.
Senator, if you don't mind, I'm going to mute for just 1 second. I have an answer here from a previous question, and I want to just ask for some follow-up before I try to answer it. Is that okay?
Yeah. Commissioner, you wanted a few seconds to check that.
Yes, please.
I'm looking at the clock and it's 11:30. I'm wondering, you'll be coming back after lunch anyways, and I'm having a dilemma here whether to, there's no one else that is going to be speaking after Representative DeVoe. Let me consult with my co-chair for 1 minute. And we can probably give you more than a few seconds. Hold on 1 minute, please. All right, 3 of us have put our heads together on this. Commissioner, yes, we will let you take a moment if you're ready to present a follow-up of a question. Second, someone else has joined after you. We will, I will request Representative Hickman wishes to speak. And then what we'll do is, starting to conclude this number 1 topic, we will ask the Attorney General if he has any comments to make before we break. And because after break, I believe he may be involved in the next question. So I hope that all makes sense. You, Representative Hickman, followed by Attorney General Frey. Thank you.
Thank you. Just 1 second. Senator, it's Mike. I'm back.
Okay, go right ahead.
Yeah, the answer wasn't as easy as I thought. So I did ask for some additional information. I'll be here with you all day. So I will keep working this. I just don't have enough clarity to get back to you right now. So we can certainly continue. I don't want to hold up the group.
All right. Representative Hickman.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, I definitely have a lot of concerns about the Fusion Center and MIAC and how it surveils the citizens of the state of Maine. We know that Maine is one of the safest states in the country. We rank very low in violent crime. in your own words, Maine has traditionally been one of the safest states in the country, and members of law enforcement truly appreciate the strong partnerships we have in our communities that have led to a 7th straight year of declining crime rates. And I believe that was from 2019. Given that we are a safe state, given that we rank very, very low or high, depending on how you want to look at it, in violent crimes. I think murders per capita is way below the national average. Why is this even necessary to keep in place after 12 years, what's going on, 2014 years of being in existence, and we keep having a decrease in our crime rate? Why is MIAC even necessary? And how long would it take to disband something like this?
Yeah, so I appreciate that. And I think the reality is that, information sharing in general is a cornerstone of what we do. I mean, that's one of the reasons I think that if we're sharing the proper information with the proper people, then in fact, you do make your community safer. So if we're sharing criminal intelligence, we're helping to facilitate investigations, those are things that in fact make us safer. And I've said Maine has traditionally been in the top 3 safest states in the country forever. And I said that for 7 years as a police chief. And I said that from that annual report, sir, is what you're quoting from 2019. And that's a reality. And that's a lot of good work that's happening with partnerships, with community members, community organizations, police departments. And a piece of that's going to be information sharing. I think that, information sharing makes businesses more effective. They make families more effective. They certainly make law enforcement more effective. And that's why, we think that's effective. And as far as if a decision is made to disband it, I suppose if we got a timeline, then we would meet that timeline. I really don't know. I haven't put any time into on how we would disband an important unit like the MIAC.
I will turn it over if Attorney General Frey, if you wish to make some comments. We're starting to wrap up before lunch, and Representative Warren will speak after you.
Thank you, Senator. I don't have anything to add to this MIAC conversation. I think that my general and specific comments would be more appropriately connected with agenda items 2 and 3. So I'll reserve the comments that I have that sort of stem from this conversation for those two topics.
Thank you. Representative Warren.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. And I think because this is we're collecting all this information for a reason. We're trying to make decisions here. And I would just say that, wouldn't you agree, Commissioner, that lots of professions share information? So I happen to wear 3 hats. I'm a social worker, I'm an educator, and I'm a legislator. And in all of my 3 roles, I'm sharing information constantly regarding the profession that I have. But I don't have a separate entity that spends $700,000 per year to do that. We just naturally share information. It's our requirement. Why does the sharing of information in this particular realm, MIAC, why does it take $700,000 a year? It's not something other professions don't do.
Well, I would say that I'm assuming naturally, and I could be completely wrong, that that political parties and caucuses and associations and all of these entities that are above and beyond an individual share information. And those entities have budgets, and they have organizations and members and payrolls and things that go along with that. And, for me, running organizations over the years, the vast majority of money comes from salaries and benefits. That's just the nature of running these style organizations. So that's where a budget comes from. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. It's just that, that's where it comes from. There are bodies there that do this kind of work. And the state doesn't pick up the vast majority of the salaries that are in that room because of the task force oriented nature of what they do. So you're absolutely correct. There is a price tag attached to that, like there is with absolutely everything else. There's a price tag for today's meeting. There's a price tag for Zoom. There's a price. All that stuff has a price tag. So, you know, as a society, as a community, as a legislature, you know, people have to make a decision on where they want to spend money or not spend money. But we do have, you know, professionals that are attached to the MIAC, and that's where that budget comes from.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, we've added one more. Representative Babbage. You're on, Representative Babbage.
Thank you very much. You can hear me now, right? Finally, it unmuted.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to take the committee's time because I did have to leave briefly for Speaker Richardson's event. But MIAC, I recall reading, had 4 management positions or whatever. One of them was a privacy officer. Has it already been discussed what the function of the privacy officer does in MIAC? If that's the case, I don't want to take the committee's time. I can perhaps look at this later, but if that hasn't been specifically asked, I'd like the commissioner to respond.
Yeah, sure. So that was not specifically asked, sir. So fusion centers in general, based on national guidelines through the Department of Homeland Security and bylaws and other things, have a compliance officer, a security officer, a privacy officer. So they do have individual functions and their focus. And as an example, security and compliance are a sergeant that happens to be based in that unit. So when we talk about vetting, when we talk about information being passed up the chain, and ultimately, is it going to be entered in the system and how, then that supervisor is required to look at that and say, is this information compliant? Is it appropriate to go here? Or do we have the proper security on site for our information in our systems? And then the privacy officer happens to be an attorney through the Department of Public Safety that wears 2 hats, as the attorney for the Maine State Police, as well as a privacy officer for this entity. And he also has that oversight capability with that position to look at information, to look at the way it's being shared, and to take part in those periodic audits. I can definitely get you a more specific definition to those based on the policies that we have in place, and ship that out if you like, if that's not deep enough for you.
Lost you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what you heard and what you didn't.
You said you could get more information, so I just didn't hear the very end.
Okay,
but to clarify for me, you're protecting who from whom? The privacy officer.
Well, the privacy officer is protecting really the general public from the improper sharing of information through the MIAC. We want to make sure that we're following the guidelines appropriately. So that if we're not, that's one of those benchmarks, one of those backstops for sharing information.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
One more showed up. Representative Hickman.
You're on mute, sir. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Gotcha, sir. Yeah.
Commissioner, can you tell me, I have a question and an information request, if I may. The question is, are any members of the advisory board compensated for their work on the board?
I don't know the answer to that. I think the answer is no, but let me confirm it. Because I know other boards, they may get transportation, like the gambling control board that I work with. They get a cost for mileage, or let me check. I believe the answer is no, but I should be able to get that one to you in a hurry.
That'd be great. I asked because there is no statutory guideline for the membership, and that would mean that if there is any compensation, it's internal to the board. My information request is, Can you please, in a future meeting, draw a direct line between all of this information gathering and the prevention of crimes against the person? Because it's your argument that this information gathering helps to keep us safe. Prove it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
And the answers I'm getting right now, and that was quick, are that they are not compensated in any way.
Thank you.
Well, that concludes this number one subject. Excuse me, is there someone, Representative Talbot Ross?
I'm so sorry, I did raise my hand, my apologies. I just had one last question, and maybe it's also.
I will recognize you, go right ahead.
Thank you, Senator. Commissioner Sauschuck, I'm just curious about the training for those who staff the center. Can you just talk to us about what that looks like, what kind of training to get, and is any of it aimed at looking at systemic racism?
So they do receive, well, let me branch out a little bit further, right? So a lot of these folks are coming to the table from their individual organizations with a specific skill set based on, whatever their experiences are, right? They're an Intel analyst, which is a clear certification. They have a secret clearance, which has some follow-up. They're required to go through criminal justice information system training and certification. They're required to receive privacy policy training on an annual basis. I'll ask specifically reference racial bias training to see, because I don't know exactly that answer. So I'm happy to dig that out as well as I think that one should be easy for me to get.
Sure. And just for clarification, I'm not talking about racial bias training. I'm talking about specifically on systemic racism.
Okay.
So typically racial bias training is around implicit bias, and I'm talking about explicit, an explicit reality. So if you could let us know what kind of training that's being offered for those folks, specifically around systemic racism, that would be great. And then if I could, Senator, I just had one other remaining question, and then if it's okay to ask my final question, Senator.
Oops. Is it a question with MIAC or can it wait till later? I'm just asking.
No, it is with MIAC. It is with MIAC, yeah.
Go right ahead, and we're going to be wrapping up.
Commissioner, I just wanted to follow up on the information sharing component and the money that we get from the federal government. I'm not sure if this was asked before. Is that contingent on you cooperating with immigration enforcement? I mean, I could state the question differently.
No, I got you. So there's that $100,000 through Homeland Security. I'll just have to check to see. The reality is that some of those federal funds have definitely come with an extensive list of new questions, new requirements over the last couple of years. Probably last 3 or 4 years, 3 years probably. So I'll ask those specifically reference to this money for the MIAC, because I don't know the answer to that. So what is the requirements under the Homeland Security grant funding, which is where we get that $100,000 from? I'll check.
And specifically related to immigration enforcement.
Yep, gotcha.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Senator.
This will be wrapping up for this morning, or question number one, or agenda item number one. And before I turn it over to Representative Pickett, I want to thank both Representative Warren and Representative Pickett for holding on the fort here with me. It's been a pleasure doing that this morning, and I think we'll get going on this again this afternoon. Representative Pickett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner, I just wanted to thank you for being here this morning. And I I thank you for the work that's being done. And with my background, I'm very familiar with the Fusion Center and MIAC and its importance in the law enforcement field. And I know you've had a lot of questions today, a lot of tough questions. You've done a very good job answering them, I believe, and information to come in the future. And I hope that this is the start of a good conversation to be able to come up with answers to any possible problems we're having. But after those problems are really looked at and see if we really do have the problem. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
And one final note, that's it. We're going to break for lunch. It is close to noon time, but so to be, get back to your desks or your assigned place by, we will begin at 12:30. All right. See you then. Bye-bye.